Good evening, everybody. My name is Barb Halpin. I am the staff liaison from Boulder County to this group of the Emergency Services Grant Program Advisory Committee. I'm going to turn the meeting over to our chair, Dennis Whalen, to get us started. And then we'll run through a couple quick slides more for the public's benefit, just to sort of frame how we're going to do this grant review session tonight. Thanks, Dennis.
Okay, you said I should do the introductions of the other members?
Yeah, might as well, since we're still kind of a new committee. Let's go around.
Okay, the current committee members, which are all but one, are here at the meeting tonight, include Kate Beasley, who represents the outdoor recreation organizations, Juliet Hands, who's a member at large, Ben Hogan with search and rescue experience, Doug Hurst, who is a member at large, Maria Kuntz, accessibility mobility representative, Doris Rigoni, represents a rural mountain fire protection district east, a rural or mountain fire protection district. Rick Steinhold, former member of a fire protection district, and myself, I represent a rural mountain fire protection district west. One member is not here able to attend tonight, and that's Lynette Anderson, who is a member at large. Our agenda for tonight is to discuss reviewing the grant applications we've received. There were 6 of them. Which Barb is just showing. Barb and I discussed how to do this earlier today, just so that we knew we had an agenda. And the first thing I wanted to do was just give people an opportunity for any overall comments about the process, without going into details on the particular grant applications. Was there anything that worked or didn't work, or was clear or not clear for you? Don't see any hands raised. Not sure I have everybody here. Nobody's saying anything. Okay, let's talk about the specific grants. My thinking was that there are probably some grants that we can pretty much agree on almost from the start, that we want to fund them. Perhaps the radios would be one, and there was a couple others, and so we could perhaps speed the process up a little bit by focusing on those that might be a little bit more controversial. Reminding everybody that we can fund all of them, we can fund part of them. We don't have to fund everything. And for 2 of the grant applicants where they had multiple items, disparate items, we can choose to fund 1 or 2 of those items, but not fund all of them. So how does everybody feel about the radios and the grant application for the radios? That seemed to be pretty positively viewed by most everybody on the committee. Yes?
Yeah. I mean, I'll go ahead and just jump in and say, I think one of the strengths was that there was a clear collaboration across different departments.
Yeah.
It was the most visible and most concrete in this application, which I think helped to hit a lot of the criteria.
I agree. Not seeing any controversial about that. I'm going to go down to a couple others that I thought were pretty clear. Indian Peaks was looking for money for a defibrillator. I'm guessing that's also not particularly controversial. Am I correct? Anybody speak up if you have any comments? Doug?
Yeah, I guess my only question is, it's not our typical AED, right? It's a cardiac monitor that is specific for a paramedic.
Right, but Aaron, other people can use it, yeah.
100%. Yep. I think it's a needed value. It's just, but only like, it's not even a reservation. It's just like, it's specific for paramedic use, like that top end side of it, right? Like an AED is for EMTs and down.
Right.
A cardiac monitor, you have to have those skill sets. So it's a very specialized piece of equipment. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's really, I don't have a ton to say, I guess, but
Okay. Rick, you had a comment?
Yes, thanks. One of the things to note, Indian Peaks is pretty out there and covers a pretty broad range of real estate, including Brainerd Lake. They're pretty far from definitive care, and anything they can do to assess in the field would be a great tool for them.
Ben?
Just the combination of the two thoughts from Doug and Rick that I think are both relevant. I think Indian Peaks only has one trained paramedic, and when a call pops where they're going to be using this equipment, it's going to be super helpful. Like Rick said, they're very far out there, but there's no immediate people coming in. AMR is going to be driving all the way up from town to assist there, so it'll be great to have the this equipment, on the patient, and that'll definitely improve patient outcome, but it is a bit specialized to their training. So I think it's a great ask by their department, but it was just a thought I had as well, just kind of echoing both thoughts here.
Okay, thanks. So I'm really not hearing any controversial items like maybe we shouldn't fund that, so. And Hygiene Fire was looking for bunker gear. Would you have any particular comments about that? Their bunker gear is out of date. I've been involved with the fire department where bunker gear was out of date, and it was a problem. Yeah, Kate.
I just didn't feel that they showed financial need. That was my only concern with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Juliet?
don't know.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I second that thought. I think that generally bunker gear is always necessary, right? But when looking at the financials and the budget, etc., it didn't feel like it was a critical need of them, that they were not going to be able to function if we didn't fund the bunker gear. Or if we didn't fund all of it. for that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Maria?
I didn't come to that conclusion. I think from the other end of the financials, my question was, what is the plan down the road? So if they couldn't afford it now and needed the support, what will the resolution be when this gear is outdated? So I don't think that's a fund, not fun, but I think it's an important question to think about longevity and financial sustainability.
Okay. Rick?
I think that Kate, Juliet, and Maria hit it right on the head. One of the things I thought I noted from that particular application was that this was 10 sets of gear for 10 people that were specifically joined in for some kind of joint task force or joint operations. And that's why I wasn't sure if maybe they had taken on additional staffing, additional responsibilities and costs to cooperate with other agencies. I didn't really get a firm understanding of that.
Yeah, that's one concern I had, is that it seemed like they were talking about they had mutual aid agreements with other people, so they had added some more fire department people, and then they wanted gear for them. it hasn't been my experience in the past, in my fire department experience, that that was how things worked, if I can put it that way. Catherine, your hand is still up. Kate? Not intentionally.
Not intentionally. Sorry, I'll take it down.
Okay. So maybe
And
that's
this-
not, yeah, go ahead.
And I would say for almost every agency, there's always the ongoing concern that your gear is getting out of dated. A number of agencies were looking to replace equipment that had aged out. But bunker gear is one of those things where, especially in rural agencies where you have a limited number of calls, you may not get to wear it or use it very often, and it'll go out of date before it's really worn through. And that's disappointing, but it's the nature of the business that things do age.
Right.
I feel like this is the point where we should bring up a question I think a few people asked, that Barb wanted to be on the record about what happens to any unused funds. So I think we might make a different decision if we need to spend all the money, but if it like stays in the pool for future years, we might make a different decision. So is this a good time to bring that up, Barb?
Yeah, in fact, I have a couple quick slides I wanted to share that addresses that question. And I think it also kind of lends in, I think when we first started talking, the idea was to sort of look at overall patterns and things. And we jumped right into individual grants, but maybe we should back up quickly and kind of look at some of that financial. So let me quickly share my screen. So one thing that we have to be conscious of as this committee is making sure that a request, grant request, meets the following, something within the following language from the emergency services ballot language that was approved by voters last year. So anything facility, equipment, capital, something that assists wildland firefighting staff and other projects that serve emergency services. So that's a really broad, but I think the scope we should be looking at maybe is not, is this a critical need as much as this money is available to help support rural and mountain fire districts. So everything that we've talked about so far falls into this category and would be eligible. The next thing that you just brought up, I think it was Kate, is about the funding. So the emergency services sales and use tax is estimated to bring in about $9 million a year. Of that, little more than half for the first 4 to 5 years is going to be allocated to the facility that was agreed upon with the voters and the language in the tax to build a search and rescue facility that could be used basically to help perform rescues in the rural area. That cost will go away, and so will half of the amount of the tax after 5 years. So that leaves the services and the annual grants pool. Right now, the estimated balance is about 50-50 between those two remaining pools. And we'll go over a little bit what might fall into the services area and what falls into the grant pool. But the commissioners have tried to stay within about $2 million a year for 2 grant cycles. And the money that they made available for this year is slightly more than that. It's 1.7 million. Doesn't mean we have to spend all of that. In fact, this is a really unique situation where the grant applications equaled less than the amount of money we have. It's usually quite the opposite. We usually get 2 to 3 times more requests than we have money to fill. I think that situation is going to be more likely next year. I think there was some discussion and talk about how the radios was such an important piece because it was going to be distributed across all of the fire districts, that it had a big one-time expense, and that might have made other fire districts say, well, I'm not going to put in a request for this round, but I'm pretty certain that they're going to put in requests for the next round. the money that you don't allocate this time doesn't automatically roll into the next pool. The commissioners with the sheriff every year will determine how much goes to the rural fire districts and how much goes to the other search and rescue organizations, the next set of funding. So they could reallocate this money that you don't allocate in the next two meetings to the services, for example. So the services are things that we know that the county is obligated under this tax to provide to the districts in sort of aggregate. So things like the training, standard training that everybody said that they want or need. Ambulance services, that contract is $1 million this year. It's probably going to go up in coming years. There were 2 or 3 additional wildland fighting personnel that were added to the sheriff's budget for 2024. That's kind of in that, sorry, I'm trying to make my mouse fit with the firefighter there. So these amounts, these internal services, these are kind of low estimates right now. And so money could flow into the orange pie if it's not spent in the grant pool. So I know it's a long way of saying it, but there is no specific dedicated amount. That those amounts will fluctuate based on need every year, and the commissioners will determine how much is in that. So tonight's unspent money could be reallocated as long as it's spent on something that is approved by the sales and use tax. So it can't be spent on anything other than what would be applicable here.
So if my understanding is correct, any money left over that we don't allocate, the sheriff will allocate for some aspect of EMS services.
Right. Technically, the county commissioners.
Well, the county
allocate
commissioners, yeah,
Yeah, but you're right. It
based on the
every
sheriff's recommendations.
every year, the orange and the blue parts of the pie will be readjusted based on the needs that the sheriff's office and the mountain and rural fire districts bring forward. So it does, I think that does give you some guidance. And then one more slide was just when when county staff and the sheriff and the commissioners met with fire districts last spring, the feedback we got was that, the greatest funding needs are staff and volunteer training, which we will pay for out of the internal services pot, bulk purchase and distributed small scale response equipment, which could really be either. I think if it's for a single fire district, it would be out of the grant pool. If it's something that all fire districts get, we might be looking at the internal services. Large and small capital equipment generally comes out of the grant pool. And then in terms of the radio, one of the things that's been identified all along is the need for a coordinated response dispatch communication system. And it was determined that the sheriff's office was going to try to figure out a way to fund the infrastructure, which I think is 12 to 15 million over several years.
Probably.
Yeah, out of the internal services pot. And then the actual equipment, the actual, radios, something that connects to that infrastructure would come out of the grant pool. So that's sort of the environment that was envisioned when the grant pool was created. And I think that's, yeah. So let me stop sharing. So whatever lays on the table tonight, obviously we want the committee to go through a very critical analysis. You are in a rare position where you have funding up to and above what's been requested. And there is some flexibility in that, that Dennis can kind of help navigate you through. But we did get approval from legal that specific questions about grants can go back, you can go back to the applicant and ask those questions. So if you wanted to pursue, why did they ask for this and not that, like that you're talking about the type of cardio defibrillator. You know, there is potential if you wanted to say, why did you ask for this piece and not that piece? It has to stay within the request sort of boundaries. But you could, if you underfund something, you could look at overfunding something else if you feel like they underestimated the expense. And from that, I'll turn it back over to Dennis.
Yeah. Rick, you had a comment?
Yes, sir. My question had to do with, was there any guidance from the board regarding how much or what percentage of the pool could go to individual agencies?
No, they left that really open for all of you to discuss. I would say that overall they want to make sure that this money fills a need or a gap, but I don't think it has to be a razor's edge type critical gap. I mean, if a fire district says this is our #1 need, and you feel like it's worthy of funding it, they won't be able to come back the next year and request anything if you fund them. I mean, if you don't fund them, they can come back and ask for something next year. But if you do fund them, they have to wait a year to ask for something else. And that was put in place so that we could have sort of a rotation of fire districts putting forward their priority needs, whether it's a priority for another district, you know, but may not be true, but it seems to be a priority for that district.
And how does it work? If an agency it becomes a grantee this year, can they be part of a joint ask of other departments that did not request this year?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and ask that question specifically. Like, I don't think they wouldn't, if like the request again was for something for all departments, I don't think they'd be excluded. But if they were one or two partnering with other agencies, that's a really good question. I'll take that back to legal.
So to rehash where we were in reviewing the grants, it seems to me that people are pretty much comfortable with the radio request, the grant request for radios. We have not formally voted on it yet, but I think we should go through and discuss them each individually first. And my sense was people are pretty much comfortable with the Indian Peaks request for an AED. But there are some questions for hygiene and their bunker gear, and we may want to consider that more after we go through the other grants. The next one I wanted to talk about or think we should maybe discuss is the Lafayette grant for technical rescue equipment. I'll let other people comment first. Yeah, Doris.
Similar to that one, I thought, when I was looking at their budget, I didn't really, the financial need there was my thought on that. So that's, I mean, being short and sweet, that was just my one thought.
Yeah, my one thought was that they were talking about doing technical rescue for Boulder County, but not in the cities, which was why they could actually apply for this grant. But for Lafayette people to get to Nederland, for example, or Ward, or someplace like that, it would be an hour, maybe 2 hours, and kind of seemed unrealistic. Yeah, Barb.
Oh, I just want to jump in quickly and say I got a little bit of information about what a technical rescue team does. And this would be specific to technical rescues within the jurisdiction that Lafayette is would co-respond to. So it probably wouldn't be the kind of technical rescue you would have up in the mountains, you know, getting somebody off a flat iron,
Okay.
or, you know, somebody gets stuck in a dangerous situation. It would be more about structure collapses, if somebody was out working in public lands or walking, they, something like fell on them, they would need to be extracted and given medical care very quickly. And so I guess the question for this one is, to what degree would this equipment be used for that use in the unincorporated areas versus used within the city? Because that's really the delineation on something like this. If an agency is a city agency that requests something that can be used for both, then it's a little squishy as to whether that should be funded out of this pool grant. But if it is something that they would use, specifically to respond and do rescues on the plains in the unincorporated areas, it could be on a barn, it could be, because just outside of Lafayette is public lands and in the unincorporated areas. Same would be true for Lafayette, Longmont or Boulder. So I think the question with that one is really about, how and where would this equipment be used, and does it fall into the eligibility under the definition of the sales and use tax?
Barb, I
Okay.
want to ask, I'm looking at the kind of, it was from our original meeting, the what is county issue 1B?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not clear to me that it's only for open space or rural. I mean, it says for the purpose of funding emergency services in Boulder County, including but not limited to. So I think, it did catch my attention. I was like, oh, Lafayette's really far east, but I'm not sure if it is excluded from this. But also of note, they indicated that, they've trained 10 members of their team for this type of rescue, and they're currently using personal vehicles and I think Lafayette City vehicles to perform rescues beyond their jurisdiction. So in that case, it does seem like it would apply, or it would be fundable. But these are, I'm raising some points, but I'm not saying I'm 100% clear on how we should be interpreting those comments.
Whenever I see language in a ballot go forward, I always wish I could edit it before it goes to the voters. But I put the slide back up because the very last piece of it is in unincorporated Boulder County. So all of the things above, it doesn't necessarily have to be on public lands, but it does have to take place in the unincorporated areas of the county. So it's basically to help the jurisdictions support residents who live in those unincorporated areas, or if we have people recreating in those unincorporated areas equally, that the response agencies have the funding they need to do that. So in this case, the idea is that the city funded fire departments have other sources of money to rescue and assist city residents. That this tax is to benefit those who live outside of the city, or those who just happen to be outside of the cities if they get injured or get lost, or just create additional safety for them, if that helps at all in terms of the clarification.
Yeah, we have some hands up here. Doris was first.
Yeah, I mean, so technically I live in unincorporated Boulder County. We're in Boulder, but the rural grasslands around here, I mean, those take off, they're going. I mean, we saw that with Marshall Mesa fire. And there's a ton of farms, farm animals, Barb, to your point, barns. So I totally see that it does apply to this. I was just curious about, maybe doing a partial funding or something along those lines. That was just my thought.
Rick?
My question had to do with, do we know, is there a map of the unincorporated parts of Boulder County that we can see?
I don't
I'm sure-
necessarily, I was
Go
just gonna
ahead.
say, Doug, you had your hand raised. Do you have something you wanted to share? I can look for something while you all continue talking.
Okay, okay. Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak to a little bit. The tech rescue that they're asking for it, as I just looked at it differently, is it's very similar to like the Boulder County hazmat team that services the entire Boulder County. It's
Mhm.
mainly made up of the paid agencies, right? But if there's something that happens in Nederland or Sunshine, which is outside the scope of what those fire departments can handle, they call on the county hazmat team to come in and handle whatever
Right.
situation is going on. That's very similar to what's being implemented with the tech rescue team. So you're talking about trench rescues. So if you have somebody digging pipes and the sidewall collapses in on them, it's pretty much outside of any fire department's ability to go in and rescue them. It's a technical rescue. You have to come in with certain shoring, spot shores, all these sort of things. Very similar to building collapse. Some people might have some stuff that they can throw in, cars into buildings, those sort of things, and or confined space. You have to have certain equipment to be able to do this confined space rescue, which is really outside of a lot of rural agencies. It means even outside of Lafayette's budget to afford any of these things because it is very expensive to do it. So it's a culmination of 6 departments trying to come together to work to service the entire county, very similar to the Boulder County hazmat team. Now, as far as the ballot language, Barb, I guess I was a little confused. I thought, there's just that catch-all at the very end. It was like, they had the list of things that, they wanted to fund, but then there's that line at the end, but not, is not limited to these things. So I didn't know if that was what applied. That's what allowed these other agencies to apply for it.
Thanks, Doug. That's helpful. Ben, you had some comments.
Yeah, just thoughts on the applications of this. Yeah, the things that come to my mind are confined rescue, and tech rescue can also include things like people falling into frozen lakes or ponds, which we definitely have in unincorporated parts of the county. So whenever there's a situation that requires resources outside of the immediate fire district help, whether that's in the mountains, tones go out and other agencies start getting pulled up. For example, Rocky Mountain Rescue gets pulled up to do technical rope extraction, no matter where it would be in the county. So I think it'd be a similar integration. So I see the benefit to the county from this, from equipping this truck and getting it able to respond when you have incidents that need this. So I see the benefit to the county for those specific things.
Thanks, Doug. My vision is changing also based on the other comments. Barb?
So 2 things. Dennis, if you wanted to solicit specific questions that I can take back to our legal team tonight, that might be beneficial before the committee makes a decision on this one. One might be, does the legal team want to look at whether this funding actually does fit the ballot language, and we can get further clarification on a request such as this that's made by a city agency but could be used to the benefit of people who live out the city. So that's one option tonight we could do. The second thing you would ask for, do you want me to show you the map of the unincorporated areas?
That was asked for, yes.
Yeah, I can do that now. So this was
Thanks,
the
Barb.
best map I could find on our website, and it's kind of detailed, but the gray areas are the cities. So you've got Ward, Nederland, Jamestown in the mountains. Everything in the green is unincorporated. And then you've got the big, Longmont, Boulder, which kind of extends up halfway into Gun Barrel, Louisville, Lafayette, Erie. Did I miss anybody? Who else is down there? But everybody in this white area, anybody up to the northern border, all the way over to the mountains, down to the south, that's unincorporated. Niwot is unincorporated. Half of Gun Barrel is
Right.
unincorporated. So it isn't just in the mountains that we see the pattern where these agencies are being asked to leave, cross their city boundaries and go into populated but rural, technically rural areas. And there's some weird pockets if you look down kind of between Lafayette and Louisville. You know, some sort of in pockets that are also unincorporated. So those would apply in this case.
Thanks, Barb. I like your suggestion about going back to legal and finding out for sure if it's okay to fund this Lafayette request for a technical rescue team.
Do you want to ask if you kind of, we don't, when you actually make the recommendation, I'll ask for a formal motion and second, but I think at this point, maybe
Yeah.
just having somebody say, yay, I sponsor that, or I agree with that.
Maria has a comment here first.
Yeah, Barb, I was just wondering, I mean, I thought I had the language for the ballot measure, and I'm not, in what I think I have, I'm not seeing the like in unincorporated Boulder County. The two places I've referenced, the slide deck from our first in-person meeting, and then just like a web source. So could you,
Yeah, let me share my
Share.
screen again.
because what you shared was not the full language, and it had the like
Right.
dot.
I
Yeah.
pulled that all though exactly from the. Let me just come back to the meeting. Hold on. Here we go. So print is tiny, tiny, tiny. So the proposal to establish, let me see if I can make it even bigger. So I put it into bullet points, but it says for the public safety in unincorporated Boulder County. It's this first paragraph.
Great. And I was only finding the second paragraph that's all in caps. So it's helpful to have this
I see.
source. Thank you.
The full resolutions, of course, have even more legalese. I'm trying to find if there's a quick thing I can point to.
If you want to, for the sake of the
kinda
record, you
this
could do
one.
a control F search, but yeah.
Well, I was just trying to find if there's a full paragraph that kind of addresses it. So sort of period, including, that's where we kind of got those pieces we pulled out. So you're saying, I mean, I could do unincorporated. I will say that there are times when members of the county will just write Boulder County, but they mean unincorporated. Because that's the only area that the county commissioners have jurisdiction over. The county commissioners cannot put forward any kind of ballot measure that overlays with the cities. It all has to take place in unincorporated Boulder County because they are the elected officials for unincorporated Boulder County. So even if it's not always spelled out, that's the intention. The intention is that cities use city funding for all of their services. The county takes care of funding for services outside of the cities and towns. And there's mutual agreements and all, like the sheriff does Lyons police work, but Lyons pays the sheriff's office to do that. So, but the commissioners cannot tax anybody in the city, and usually does not provide services inside cities. So I, again, just kind of scrolling through this, I'm not sure, but that is I know that for a fact that is the intention. It's to make sure that the unincorporated areas get more coverage and more funding because they were behind the cities.
That's really helpful. Thanks for clarifying all of that.
Doris, you had something?
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, I mean, this, if we're going back to the county commissioners on that, that does mean it's Boulder County, because they're the ones who run the budget for the county. And personally, I think it absolutely falls within, I mean, this is a county-wide measure and it specifically states unincorporated. So I personally think this absolutely falls within the scope of the request.
I mean, I kind of think it does too, but we have time so we can go to legal and just verify that. Assuming everybody agrees. Yes,
I'll
Debbie-
second that motion.
Thank you. One quick just additional to that, if the legal says they need to know more, do I also have the permission to say the committee has asked the chair to ask Lafayette for additional information? Because we may have to, it may be a two-step process. It may be that legal needs to weigh in, but we also need a little bit more understanding of how that equipment would be used before legal can weigh in, essentially.
that's okay with me. Is it okay with the rest of the members of the committee? And Rick, you had a comment?
Yeah, specifically, if we're getting details, if we're asking for further detail, if that's a request that's made, there should be some direct indication of unincorporated Boulder County.
Yeah, it would be helpful if I could get at least some little bit more finite direction from this committee about what we would ask Lafayette. Is it solely about how and if this equipment will be used in unincorporated rescues? Is that generally the census?
I mean, maybe
I
if
think that-
if we're going to ask them, I think some context of like, these are instances where it was needed. I mean, I'm generally in favor of it. And I think looking at the map, Lafayette borders a huge swath of unincorporated Boulder County. So once seeing that, it's like, okay, this makes sense to me. But if there was concern, you know, it could be like, okay, we had 10 calls last year and we didn't have the equipment we needed, or, you know, I think maybe that would be helpful context.
Perfect.
I agree with Maria, but I'd really like it to be focused on, give us some examples of rescues that were needed in unincorporated Boulder County, not in the city of Lafayette.
And I
Does
think
that
this will
sound
be really,
adequate, Barb?
it does. And I do think this will be beneficial for, I mean, tonight it's Lafayette, next year it could be Longmont, Louisville, Erie. I mean, you know, this is sort of helps set some precedent and helps us deal with requests like this that might come from a different city in the next round. Okay, so I'm good on that. I've taken notes and I'll work with Dennis on before our next meeting, getting some additional information on Lafayette.
Okay. What did I get here?
I also do have a slide with the the 6 grant abbreviated purposes on it. Do you want me to put that up on the screen shortly, Dennis, so we can just sort of share
Yeah,
with the
that would be
public?
helpful. Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
helpful.
and it'll kind of center us because I know you're all looking in different places as we go through tonight. Let me just find out where that is. So the first 3 grant proposals have to do. Well, you've talked about Boulder County Firefighters Association, the radios, which was the big request for $1 million.
Right.
You've talked about Indian Peaks, which was a much smaller request. You haven't talked about Gold Hill.
Right.
And we also have, and you've talked a little bit about hygiene, but in Lafayette. So Sunshine and Gold Hill are 2 that you haven't touched on yet.
Right, right. And that's what I was gonna go to next is Gold Hill, if that sounds reasonable.
Okay, I'll leave that up there for just a bit for others to review.
Okay. And Gold Hill had three disparate requests, 3 requests for different things, 4 requests for different things, excuse me. One was to replace the old hose, which I'll give you my opinion, that sounds like something that really should be funded. And environmental sensors, to me, that sounded like something that should be funded. Extraction equipment seemed pretty questionable to me. And smoky packs also seem pretty questionable to me. Now you have my opinion. Others? Ben.
I think the smoky packs are something that makes sense and kind of in the spirit of this grant is this looking at how does this help other agencies and other members of the county. So I think that having some reciprocity with their smoky packs with others that are operating nearby them, all the surrounding agencies, I think that would help. I think they said that their smoky packs have different size hose and some of them have structure hose in them. So I think that there would be some benefit to, the greater members of the surrounding community when, if a call pops up where you're using those, that everyone has the same equipment. I think that was my interpretation of this, of their ask for the smoky pack.
Okay. I don't see other comments. Yes, Doris.
Sorry, yeah, the question on this one I had was just on some of the stuff. I want to see the financial need, because their budget, if you go into their financials, they have a good projection year over year of increasing revenue. So some of it I think is absolutely warranted. Other of it, I was kind of like, well, that would, think about that. That was my only question or thought on this one.
Doug?
Yeah, just looking at all the requests to me, I think it's kind of meets the intent of this whole grant. You're giving a department that has minimal funding opportunities to replace sensors that is going to detect carbon monoxide inside a structure for people. They're going to replace hose that they need. They're going to standardize some of their wildland firefighting equipment with the rest of the agencies, and then some extrication equipment. To me, it just seemed pretty reasonable request in my eyes.
Okay, and Juliet?
I completely agree with what was just said. There was something that caught my attention in the grant request was the mention of old gear. I think it was related to extrication gear falling out of service several years ago. And I wonder if there's a question maybe back to the department around maintenance cost, and should we be funding that as well if it's going to be a problem to avoid equipment falling out of service again, maybe. I'm just wondering about the sustainability if we just do the one time, and considering this is a one-time grant and not a repetitive one.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask Barb, do we fund ongoing maintenance? I'm thinking that's not something this committee is supposed to deal with.
That is a very good question. My understanding is that no, that an agency could build in maintenance to their request. They would have to sort of keep it as a line item. But we will not go back and help maintain something that we fund in this cycle. So the idea is that if it is something that needs ongoing maintenance, for instance, the example was used if a fire district wanted a specific truck, and that truck's going to need several oil changes every year, they would be better off putting the oil changes in as part of the purchase amount, showing the truck plus how many oil changes they think it's going to need over 5 or 10 years, and building that into their grant request, and thereby paying for it as they go along. but there's no sort of coming back to the grant pool or the county for update and maintenance on any equipment.
Okay. Maria, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this has kind of come up a few times, like, oh, do they have the financial need? And in a past life, I was a frontline development officer and doing fundraising, communication, and grant writing. And so I think it's always a conundrum when sometimes there's money that's only available once or for a short period of time, and it could really benefit an organization. And so people will ask for it. And I think, thinking about the long-term impact is critical, but we also, when the equipment falls out of service in 10 years, they'll have a whole different financial scenario that they can't fully project right now. So they hopefully will be working toward that and have plans. And I think on our side, we need to be thinking about the fact that the taxpayers said, yeah, we want to support this. So, if there's not a lack of funding, how do we do our due diligence and our duty on behalf of the county to make sure that we're dispersing the funds that folks want to get out into the community? So it might not be a perfect resolution. People may not have a 10-year maintenance plan, but they know they could benefit from that funding now. And by not using their reserve or their existing budget, they might be able to fund something else that that is outside of the parameters of this grant.
Okay. Ben, you just went away.
Yeah, not much to add. I was just going to echo what Ria was saying, and yeah, just for a small mountain fire department like this, there's a big benefit by helping them out with this, which is the point of this this grant. I had one other point that I forgot, but
Okay. And Rick.
I would just point out, especially regarding the smoky packs, a large percentage of the square footage, the square acreage of the greater Gold Hill area includes a lot of national forest where there's dispersed camping, a lot of people starting fires, and the ability to quickly and effectively extinguish something decreases the likelihood of fire spreading.
Or decreases the likelihood of fire spreading. Yeah. So it sounds like people are generally in favor of this. Shall we go on to sunshine? You scroll down. Sunshine wanted 3 things. Improvements, the brake retarder stuff for their one apparatus, UTV, and a command vehicle.
I'd like all that too.
What was that, Rick?
Yeah, I think a lot of agencies would like a lot of that as well.
I'm not sure I understood you, Rick.
I think he's being facetious.
Yes, disregard.
So Dennis, if I could just jump in for a quick second.
Yeah.
Because you and I kind of had a conversation to set the agenda, and this is one of those where the committee really might want to focus kind of on a future precedent that is set by these the third particular response. But right now we are in this very unique situation where you have, there is money to fund everything, but that won't be the situation down the road. And so I appreciate the fact I feel like the committee is really all along tonight been taking a very critical analysis and view of each one of these requests. And I think the piece here that might need to be considered is what kind of precedent, because to Rick's point, every fire department probably will put in a request for the third on the list here at some point if it's granted to the, in this round. So just to keep that in mind, that that's a piece too, to keep every time you're looking at one of these grants, think about what kind of precedent it's setting for future rounds of grants. And that's all I'll say on that.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. And it slipped my mind, but yeah, if we fund a command vehicle for one department, we can expect to have requests for command vehicles for lots of departments. And we need to consider whether we want to do that or not, or perhaps only fund it if it's a really special request for a unique command vehicle. Other comments? Yeah, Maria.
I mean, on reviewing these, my thought was this is maybe one that we split, because I had the same concern that's been surfaced, like, well, this is a really significant investment. Even, I had a question about the critical brake safety concern, and I thought, okay, I can understand they have a concern that they right now need maintenance, but it does go back to like, oh, how did they get to this position? And yet we do want people in the mountain regions to have access to emergency services. It might be a question for them. And I think even the UTV is a smaller purchase than a command vehicle. And they seem to have made the case for why that would be helpful there. These are just much larger purchases with much more significant, with more significant maintenance costs. And the first is truly a maintenance cost.
Right. Doris?
On this one, I actually thought Sunshine, they show a financial need. Their budget's not nearly as big as some of these other applicants. And I think I'm doing this from memory. I think they have roughly 50% of the call volume that hygiene had. Roughly, I think, and again, I'm doing this from memory, and they have way less of a budget. So I felt like this one actually was pretty strong in giving them the grant money, just given their financial need on that. And, the services that they have, because it is a very active part of Boulder County. So they do get quite a few calls. That was just my thought.
So you're including in that funding a command vehicle?
No, I mean, if you're asking me personally, I would do for the maintenance, and then the Can-Am, I think that's a slippery slope, but given the location, and I'm right, this is up Batasso, doing that ride a lot, it could be very helpful for them having a Can-Am to help someone on Batasso. I mean, it's going to be really hard to get a truck on some of those areas. So to me, this one, given their budgets, it made financial sense to me. It's my thought.
Maintenance one certainly did to me too. Other comments? So I'm hearing some question about funding a command vehicle, and maybe questions about a UTV, but we'd probably want to fund the critical brake item for their apparatus. Just trying to summarize things a little bit. I know it's about 7 o'clock. I was going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break, and then we can come back and maybe discuss in more detail and vote on these grants.
And just before we go away, I wanted to make it clear, I'm not suggesting how the committee might want to view that particular grant, given that you do have funding this round. It's just, so I just want to make it clear, I'm not trying to sway your opinion either way. It's just something to consider about what other grants might come in later. And maybe that is used, it could be that you fund something when you have the money available that you can't fund when you don't have the money available. So that's another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But you say 5 minutes breaks, we'll come back at 7:05?
Yes.
Okay, thanks everybody.
So why don't you go ahead with your question, Rick? And
My question had to do with number 10, serving prioritized communities. Member, and I wasn't sure where in the ask that was showing up. And specifically, what I saw a lot of responses were, we don't discriminate, we help everyone. So I wasn't sure exactly how to score that.
I can respond to that if you'd like, Dennis.
Yeah, we discussed it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Rick. It's the policy of Boulder County to really put equitability and racial equity, sustainability, all of those inclusivity questions into any grant process like this. When Dennis and I were talking, I mean, the fire protection districts are in a certain situation where they absolutely have their jurisdiction. They're going to respond to everybody. I think that question, and one of the questions we're going to come back to this committee with for the second round of grants is how you want to maybe tweak that question. But essentially, as we look at rescue groups and nonprofit agencies that do serve maybe specific communities, I think it has more value in their response. I don't think that there really was a response from fire districts other than what they all said, which is, you know, we get called, we go out, we serve everybody. But I think it's going to be a little different if we're trying to reach disability community, you know, groups that support getting more people out and recreating in a safe manner. I think it'll make more sense when we include a question about that in the next round.
Thanks, Barb.
Does that help? I wasn't
Still
pulling it
not
out.
sure how to score it. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Still not sure how to score it.
I agree, and I don't think fire districts really knew how to answer it other than to say what they did. So we're finding our way in that. So we're all, it's just kind of up to your personal feelings about how to score that on this particular case.
Maria?
Yeah, I was curious. I had a similar experience when rating these, but listening to you, Barb, I had a question I didn't consider and I don't have an answer for. So I'm hoping that folks who have more experience with search and rescue will know if, you know, there is an answer to this. Is there equipment that is needed, maybe specifically for people with different physical needs and accessibility? Is there equipment that districts could be requesting that they're not?
Great
So
question.
I would say, just as the search and rescue person here, yeah. A lot of groups train for, you know, I think the classic is, what if this person is a amputee missing a limb? You know, how do you address that? Most equipment is set up so that it will still work no matter what someone's disability might be. So it would be, to me, it would be extremely niche to get something for that, when most equipment will generally help 99.99% of people, even with some sort of disability.
Yeah, the only equipment I could think is like an extreme bariatric or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even like
Yeah.
traction splints, we train on how to use those with someone amputated below the knee. You know, you can do that if you get creative, stuff like that.
And does that go for folks who may have like limited or no use of limbs? So somebody, I mean, I'm thinking, you know, there are ways to carry people out who are injured and temporarily don't have use of limbs. But if you have someone who is like paraplegic, for example, it still would fall within to sort of the 99.9%. I see heads nodding. Okay.
Yeah.
I think one area you might want to look at too is language. You know, if somebody is distressed and their main language is not English, are there ways that we could support individuals who might speak another language? Just saying, you know, I know connectivity is difficult out in the mountains. Cell service often doesn't work. Things that we would normally say, well, we'll just connect somebody, you know, to an interpreter, isn't applicable when you're on peak to peak highway. But that's another area that could be looked at down the road, just to make it a little bit more accessible. I had one.
Yes,
Okay, does someone have their hands up? I just want to make sure I'm not jumping on anyone
No,
else.
you're fine. Go ahead, Barb.
Well, when we were on break, I remembered something that Commissioner Lochamin had said in a meeting, and that is, you know, as we're looking at these rural fire districts, the assumption is most of them are way underfunded, and many have very little financials. And so when the question comes up about, you know, does it look like they could afford to pay for this thing themselves? Another way to look at that is, you know, eventually the commissioners want to move towards helping to fund, basically pay volunteers for their work. Right now, we rely extensively on volunteer response in the mountains. And that's wonderful that we have these people that are willing to do that and dedicate their time on a voluntary basis. But we do know that that is becoming harder and harder to source, that the reality is that most people need to be paid for their work in order to be able to show up, especially on an on-call basis. And so as the commissioners look to ways to be able to create a way to pay responders, if you know, it gives the fire departments more flexibility in how they can spend their money. So if this group gives them a $60,000 truck, that's $60,000 that might be able to be put towards, if not salaries, at least stipends. So it's kind of a little bit different way of looking at whether they can afford a specific piece of equipment, and what does, by us funding that equipment, mean that they could spread that money in other ways. So I just wanted that, I hadn't brought that forward before, but it's just another thing to keep in mind as you're looking at these grants.
Boy, and if they can fund retroactively to
That's right. Fill your fund from the past. Your
yes,
past
yes.
work.
Yeah.
That would be very nice.
So I'm thinking to continue on to the agenda, and I'm certainly open to suggestions. There are at least some of these grant requests that my sense are we're willing to vote on and at least approve preliminarily. We might want to go back and ask if they want more money, such as the radios, but we could vote on at least some, if not all of them, and move on to a more detailed step, like going back and seeing if some particular agencies could use more money. The radios was the most obvious one to me, but there may be some others. Does that make sense, Barb, who has your hand raised?
Just as a point of process, I think you'll take one final vote at the very end, probably at the next
Okay.
meeting. So maybe if we could list, you know, kind of put in a parking lot the things that look like they're, you know, tentative approval.
Okay.
And for me, I have the radios, Indian Peaks. That was about it. I don't think we've gotten
Gold
clarification
Hill sounded like it was pretty
for all
well
four.
supported.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that leaves hygiene, the bunker gear, Lafayette, which we're going to get further
We had
information,
legal
clarification.
questions for, and it wasn't clear to me about Sunshine and
Sunshine.
how much we wanted to fund for Sunshine.
That's what I have too. Thanks.
Now, I'm thinking that Sunshine, the one thing we seemed to be in agreement on was funding their brakes for their truck. Comments on the other items, the UTV and the command vehicle.
I thought
And I have
Doris had some very valid points about some of the areas that Sunshine responds to, where a UTV might be a needed tool.
Might be a valuable item. Other people agree with that? Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I agree with Rick. A lot of the surrounding agencies have UTVs, and being able to, you know, further Sunshine's response with that would be helpful. I think the command vehicle, I think it seems like we would be giving a lot of money to a small mountain department without clear distinction from this grant on how they would be funding it and maintaining it and supporting it. And I think that there's some thought on precedent as well. So that I think has kind of been echoed around here. So I think that might be one that we say, we this could be a candidate for something that we scale back on the grant ask.
Okay. The other opinions, I'm hearing that we'd probably agree to fund the UTV and the brakes for Sunshine, but not the conveyance vehicle. Does that sound like kind of a consensus? Speak up if you have any other thoughts. And the other one was hygiene in their bunker gear.
Dennis, I thought your comment on that was right on, talking about which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and bringing people on without having the resources to equip them. It creates a situation.
Mm-hmm. And bunker gear is one of those things every department can always use more of. At least that's been my experience. Nobody is saying anything. So my
it
summary
sounds,
is,
sorry,
go
it's not,
ahead.
I can't tell if y'all are skeptical of the bunker gear or in favor of it. I mean, I was speaking for myself in favor of it, but the last two comments left me thinking maybe you're questioning whether or not they should be asking for it.
Well, I think the intention was to be in favor of it, Maria.
Okay.
So a general agreement, which please speak up if you don't agree, is that we would fund the radios, we would fund Indian Peak, we would fund Gold Hill. For Sunshine, we would fund the UTV and the brakes. For hygiene, we would fund the bunker gear. And for Lafayette, we'll go get a legal opinion and maybe pass on some additional questions to Lafayette about supporting Boulder County outside of the city limits. Does that sound like the summary? Rick has got his thumb up. Others? Doug? Doris? I can't see your thumb. Okay. Does that sound good, Barb?
That sounds great. Yeah, I've got all that captured. So it looks
Okay.
like next time we'll come back, we'll talk about Lafayette. And then just trying to queue up the other areas, Dennis, you and I talked about in terms of hot wash after.
Right. So there will be money left over. One way or the other, do we want to, for example, check with the radio request to see if they could use more funds? Or do we want to just let the funds go back to the sheriff to distribute as they choose to recommend to the county commissioners? Yes, Rick.
If I recall, when they were originally talking about in the radio request, they were talking about how they had purposely underfunded it a little bit because there were some agencies they thought that could carry the load for their part of it. I'm excited to hear how the sheriff's going to be creating more towers and creating more service within our rural areas, so we have communication amongst ourselves and with communications. I love the idea that we can come down to the flats and help out and have a unified communication system, but I'm more interested in knowing how in these rural areas we can have connections with those things that matter in emergencies.
Barb?
So to that point, Rick, and thanks for bringing that up. And I know I mentioned that, the sheriff is going to look to this overall pie, but those are big amounts of money. I think the very smallest piece was, I think, $4 million up near for the Allens Park, Raymond Riverside, Indian Peaks, the western part, or north part, I guess. So what little money that you might not spend here probably won't won't go to that. I think we're gonna have to look down the line. So I just want to make it clear that sparing $50,000 in this round isn't going to get us closer to that infrastructure. Getting that building built will get us closer to that infrastructure. So just to keep that in mind. And I have a little bit more information about the radios. So the BCFFA did pull back there. If they were to have outfitted all of the career and the volunteer fire districts with radios, it would have been about 2.1 million. And so that would have bust this budget alone, just that one request. So they went back and they said, okay, well-funded career fire departments can buy their own radios. They'll get the discounted rate because we're still going to be buying in bulk, but they'll pay for theirs. But a piece that they did pull out also was they were going to order radios for the sheriff's office to have as kind of loaner units. So if somebody's radio broke down in the mountains, the sheriffs could loan them out one of those radios, or the sheriff's deputies would carry them in their vehicles so that if again there was somebody responding who didn't have one, they could use it. So that piece was also pulled out. That's something that could be considered being put back in if this committee was interested. But it might be worth going back to them and saying, what you cut pretty close to the bone with this $1 million request. What was the hardest thing to cut? And see if they want to even just give you that information for consideration. So, and I don't know about the other ones.
Okay, hang on just a minute. Doug has his hand raised for a few minutes here. Doug?
Yeah, I guess my only question would be going back, just looking at the radio allocation, just how they came up with like what numbers they're going to give to what departments. There were some departments that were getting 65 radios.
I don't know if Boulder Mountain even has that many firefighters.
Right. That's why I was wondering, like, do they even have that many volunteers, and does every single volunteer need their own personal radio? Like how they came up with the numbers that they did for what radios they needed. If we're going to allocate more money, which I think is good doing because it's what's needed, but just like, how did they come up with their radio count? I know Barb, you said something about being a lot of pack sets and they're not touching any of the mobile units. Would be cutting down on some of these pack sets and addressing some of the mobile units, be a better allocation of how they're doing these radios. I mean, that would just be my only question to them. I don't know what chief was. Was it Left Hand's chief that put this together? I can't remember.
It was
Yeah.
Chris O'Brien, the treasurer of
Yeah.
the BCFFA and Left Hand Fire Chief. I do know that how they got their count was they just asked how many radios does everybody want? So that's it was volunteered by every district how many they would want. So I think this group has some leeway to push back on that and say, can you I'm not sure whether their final count, like those 65 radios, I think Mountain View was one of those that, oh, you said Boulder Mountain.
Boulder Mountain.
Yeah.
Between Boulder Mountain and Coal Creek, those two agencies alone are asking for about a third of the radios. So
you could push back on that. You could say, we want to see a little bit more equitable distribution.
I think Doug brings up a good point. I think we could go back and say like, hey, we have a certain amount of money we're planning to allocate, but is this exactly how you want to do it? And I agree, the mobiles could be a good ask.
So for the next meeting, it would be nice. We would like to go to ask about one, if there was what they cut out of their ask for the 1 point whatever million. What was the most critical that maybe we could add back in if we had the money? And two, we want to know how they're allocating the radios and maybe suggest different allocations or some justification for at least how they're allocating the radios. I see heads nodding.
think, yeah, that's exactly what I would recommend. So I think that's a great list.
Okay, so we can go to them in the next 2 weeks also.
Yeah. And obviously with not any, guarantee that you go above what they've asked for, but just gives this committee
Right.
more to work with.
Right, before we make the final recommendations.
Anything else you all want to
Sounds
tack
like
on
we're
about
re-
that? I don't understand the difference. You were talking about mobile radios versus the ones stationary that stay at a facility and ones that go out in vehicles. Is that?
The difference
No.
is one is the individual can hold in their hand, and then the other one's mounted in the car
Got it.
or in the
Thank you.
vehicle itself. So
Yeah, and having the ones in the fire truck are pretty important versus the handheld. You're going to get a lot more range on them, a lot more distance. The more rural you are, the more you want a vehicle with a radio in it.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and the other part of it is the more people that have handhelds, the more confusing the communications get. Yes, Maria.
So my question is about how are those radios dedicated to vehicles then? And are they in people's personal vehicles, or do they need to be attached to a dedicated fire department vehicle?
My experience is that they are certainly in the fire department's apparatuses, and in some cases they may be in personal vehicles too. Ben?
Yep, same answer.
Okay.
Yes, for instance, if you don't have a command vehicle, whoever is running the show may have it in their vehicle, and they're used to taking command and needing communication.
That was sort of what I was thinking about, given the other grant request for a command vehicle. And I was like, oh, well, where would theirs live?
Mm-hmm.
And just one point to add about the radios is I did confirm that the county sheriff's office will help program those radios so that everybody is programmed in a similar manner. And they would also help with repairing radios. I'm not really sure what all that entails, but that's sort of a standing cost that the county would absorb at the sheriff's office based on this request.
Just the programming itself is a huge deal. As Boulder County continues to grow and develop its communications plan, there's multiple different plans that go into place at any given time. Having a radio is able to easily switch between these different plans depending on the scale of the event is huge. And that would be a huge savings to all districts if that were done by the sheriff's office.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. And I guess these radios have the ability that they can be remote programmed. In the past, everything had to be brought in to the offices, and so they'd have a big barbecue, which they're still willing to do. But the nice thing for the sheriff's staff is that they can actually send out those plans you talked about and have the radios kind of program themselves on location and not have to come down to the planes to do that.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah, so the current radio infrastructure is led by Scott Whitehead at the sheriff's office, and rural and mountain departments can bring their mobiles in for programming by the sheriff's office, and they'll handle maintenance of some of your key radio and comms infrastructures. So it'll just be a rollover. Let's say, the sheriff's office is the thing. You guys are gonna get new equipment. We're gonna program it and we'll maintain it as we have been before. And we'll be able to remote program. So you can clone them. You can clone radio to radio if you're on a wildland incident. So I think that there was a question appropriately brought up last time by Doug saying, will we get actual training or programming help? And it seems to me that this application did say that we will cover all this, and the infrastructure is there to have this be an effective one-time pulse of money for the departments, and then the support will be there from the county.
Very good. So it sounds like we have a path going forward for the grant request at this time. Am I missing anything for there, Barb?
No, you all got pretty far today. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, the next part was a little bit of a lessons learned. Next part of the agenda.
And do you think we should probably cover that? Do you want to cover that the next meeting, or I guess
We
it's up
can
to
do
you
that at the next meeting. It would probably make more sense.
after you wrap up your recommendations and.
Right, right.
But if anybody
And,
is keeping any notes, that's helpful for us to talk about next time.
And the third item on the agenda was 2024 meeting dates.
Yeah, and I still owe you all a doodle poll. So let's try to I'll get that out soon, and then we'll revisit that on the next meeting too. We're looking for dates out
Okay.
February, March, April primarily. As we kick off the second round, the first round of 2024, but the second round that you'll all be considering of grants, and it'll be different because of the groups that are eligible to apply. So we'll need to spend a little time on how to craft that application and how to really get it out to groups that we're not as familiar with as we are the fire departments.
Okay, and I have one question about that. Is there going to be one round or two rounds in 2024?
Sounds to me like we're going to do 2 rounds, that they're going to
Okay.
keep these separate going forward. So we'll do the rescue agencies and nonprofits in 1 round early first 6 months of 2024, and then another round of fire districts shortly after that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Just
but
good.
now we'll be so well healed by that point.
Well trained.
Well,
Yes.
it's hard to do something for the very first time, you guys. So
Does anybody else have any comments, questions, concerns? Our next meeting is in 2 weeks.
is anybody not able to make that meeting? I know we were concerned about running into holiday parties and all. Sounds like we're good for now. Okay, we'll keep that on the books then.
Looks like we're good.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for your time and for I think we're getting close to a resolution on this. That's great.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Dennis. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.